And today with us and leading this discussion is going to be Natasha Alford. Natasha is an award-winning, longtime journalist and producer who's driven by the power of storytelling. That is the kind of storytelling that inspires people and changes their lives. Natasha is the Vice President for Digital Content for theGrio Digital Network. She's also Senior Correspondent for theGrio, covering social issues including criminal justice, education, politics, and culture. Welcome, Natasha. Take it away.
Oh, great to see you. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Good morning, buenos dias. Wherever you are tuning in from, we want to thank you for being part of this conversation. And of course, happy Hispanic Heritage Month, Latinx Heritage Month, however you celebrate it. We are excited for this conversation about what it means to be Afro-Latino working in the news industry. And so this conversation about identity, we know it's not a trend. You know, this is life. This is a matter of really fighting for our communities and making sure they're represented. And so I'm honored to be a panelist, but also to introduce my fellow panelists. And I will introduce them one by one, just a very quick bio. They have very amazing resumes, but these are some highlights. But first and foremost, Corallys Ortiz from WBBJ-7 News. Welcome, Corallys. Good to see you. Corallys is a weekend evening meteorologist and a multimedia journalist at WBBJ-7. She joined their team in November 2017. She was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, but she was raised in Massachusetts. And she grew up in an area that always had a lot of changing weather. And so that's where her love for the weather came from. Hi, Corallys. Good to see you.
Hi, thank you. No, thank you for having me.
Awesome, awesome. And our next panelist who'll be joining us is Abraham Jiménez Enoa from Washington Post Opinion. Abraham, good to see you. Abraham has published reports and opinion columns in the New York Times, the BBC World, Al Jazeera, Vice News, Univision, and other international media. He is a graduate in journalism from the School of Communication at the University of Havana, and he co-founded El Estornudo, the first online Cuban magazine dedicated to narrative journalism. Buenos dias, Abraham.
Buenos días y muchas gracias por la invitación. Un gusto estar por acá.
Un placer. So I have one more guest. He's a legend. Tony Dandrades from Primer Impacto.
Man.
Sure you know Tony.
Oh my God, you call me legend. I feel old. I just
No, that's a good
old.
thing, Tony. We're trying to get on your level, Tony. But Tony, of course, he's a graduate of Inter-American University of Puerto Rico. He studied radio and television, and he worked for 5 years as a presenter of the weekend weather segment on Channel 23 in Miami. And then after that, he left Channel 23 to work at Primer Impacto, and he's been there ever since. He has 5 Emmy nominations, and he is also a winner of 2 Sovereign Awards for Outstanding Communication Abroad. Welcome, Tony. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me. This is a great idea. I'm so happy to be with you guys. Very happy.
Absolutely. So it's great to see your beautiful faces. This is going to be an open conversation and a real conversation, and it will be bilingual as well. So for those of us who want to speak in English or who want to speak in Spanish, feel free to speak in whatever language you feel most comfortable. But the first question I wanted us to really think about is, how did we make it in news? We know that this industry often doesn't have a lot of diversity or people who look like us, particularly in Spanish language media. So how did we make it? What inspired us to still go after that dream, even though there was a lack of diversity? Whoever wants to start.
Well, let me start. I would like to speak in part in English, part in Spanish. I'm from Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo, the capital of the merengue. And since I was a kid, you know, I was related to image and audio. I'm close when I was maybe 8 years old, 9 years old, I was playing with little baterias, pilas as a camera in my room. And I was cutting like a little piece of card. And then I created like a little studio in my house. Nobody knows about it. My mom didn't know that I was playing with those kinds of things, you know, like a battery and a pedazo de cartón. And then she took me to a psychologist. She thought I was crazy, pensaba que estaba loco. And then when we emigrated to Puerto Rico, I was like 17 years old. And I finished the high school in the Dominican Republic, and then I started the university in Puerto Rico, Interamericana. And it's been news since I started my career. I started my career as an editor. I was, my first package, I did it in 3/4. 3/4 was like a huge tape like that. And we was editing in a U-matic. It's a machine that now maybe is in the Smithsonian, in the museum, because you can find it right now. And that helped me a lot, you know. Right now, in those days, I do my editing in, you know, more sophisticated equipment. I use Adobe Premiere. But going back to your question, you know, news is in my ADN and my ADN. So it's good for me. It's a pleasure being working on news since my beginning, and doing entertainment. That for me it's a little bit harder to do entertainment than hard news. Maybe my colleague can say no, that the hard news is harder, but being entertainment in the news give me the opportunity to be more creative, you know, and make a little movies in each report.
Right. Corallys?
Well, yeah, I mean, growing up, first of all, weather was something that I was so interested in. I would drive my family crazy because they always laugh and make fun of me, saying how all I wanted to do was watch local news and the Weather Channel. That's all I watched growing up. And I just never imagined that I would actually be doing it. As of now, even now, I still don't even believe myself that I'm doing it. So growing up, I did just watch a lot of local news a lot. And in terms of my background, yes, I was born in San Juan. My family is all mostly from the Dominican Republic. So we have a pretty diverse family. So in terms of seeing people who look like me in news, not a whole lot in New England, but because I did watch some national, some of the Hispanic channels as well, something I was kind of used to watching with my family. So I didn't think a lot of it just because I was kind of used to being at least surrounded by diverse backgrounds in terms of Hispanic and Latinx people. But just growing up, I always had a passion for meteorology. So I ended up going to college in Florida, graduated 2016 in meteorology. But I did want to do a little bit more. I wanted to do more hands-on and do more storytelling. So I decided to go and get my grad school, go to get my master's back home in Boston for journalism. And that's where I really got kind of immersed myself more in the news industry. I interned in NBC and everything, and just really what kind of helped kickstart everything. So now doing this for 3 years, it's definitely a dream come true. I definitely have my fair share of experiences, and being one of the first, I want to say, even the first Hispanic Afro-Latina meteorologists at the station I'm in Jackson, Tennessee. So of course I'm in the Mid-South. People ask a lot of questions about my background. They hear my name Ortiz, but then they see me and they're like, where are you from? But yeah, it's been definitely kind of great to be a representative in this industry, for sure.
And I wanted to make sure we repeated the question in Spanish as well. Ricardo, would you be able to jump in, or anyone else? So the question again was, there is a lack of diversity when we talk about people of color in news, particularly Afro-Latinos. And so how were our panelists and journalists able to push through? What inspired them to go into news despite that?
Abraham, hola, soy Ricardo. Y mira, la pregunta que tenemos aquí ahorita enfrente de nosotros es, si nos hablas un poquito de tu carrera, ¿no? ¿Qué fue esa inspiración que salió siendo como un impulso a llevarte a donde hoy estás como profesional, como periodista? Y también si puedes hablar un poco de lo que has visto en tu tiempo sobre la falta de voces afrolatinos y imágenes también afrolatinos en medios de comunicación. Háblanos un poco de tu misma carrera.
Sí, bueno, un poco yo llegué a ser periodista por azar, porque realmente mi gran pasión es el deporte. Y de niño siempre recuerdo que en el barrio y tal, más allá de jugar en las calles de La Habana y tal, cuando llegaba a casa a media tarde, a los mediodías, me acostaba en la cama o en el sofá de la casa y en vez de jugar a lo que jugaban todos los niños, los pistoleros y tal, cogía las muñecas de mi hermana y lo que hacía era narrar partidos de fútbol, de béisbol y tal. Luego, cuando fui más grande, me di cuenta que cuando fracasé, cuando quería ser pelotero, jugué de niño, digamos, lo que se puede llamar profesional acá en Cuba. Cuando fracasé, que me di cuenta que era muy malo, quise ser comentarista deportivo. Y por eso es que empiezo a estudiar en la Universidad de Cuba para ser comentarista deportivo. Pero luego, una vez llegué ahí y me topé con, digamos, con los grandes del periodismo, sobre todo narrativo, Truman Capote, Gay Tales y tal, me cautivaron y deseché, sigue siendo mi gran pasión, pero deseché, digamos, esa afición por querer ser periodista deportivo, comentarista en sí. Luego también Cuba es un país donde no existe libertad de expresión, donde hacer prensa solamente le es permitido a los medios que están subordinados al Partido Comunista de Cuba, único partido legal en el país, y un poco toda esa realidad que está y sigue aún ahora menos oculta, que el gobierno no quiere que se vea, que los ciudadanos accedan a esa realidad, que la beban, fue lo que me impulsó a mí a querer narrar, digamos, esa otra cara del país. Me gradué en 2012, a la altura de 2016, junto con unos amigos, fundamos una revista de periodismo narrativo y empezamos a contar todas esas zonas oscuras que antes no estaban por contar en Cuba. Fue un contexto un poco que nos ayudó, porque 2016 visita Obama a Cuba, Rolling Stone da un concierto en La Habana, un poco Cuba se puso de moda, por decirlo de alguna manera, en el espacio mediático, y eso ayudó a mi revista y a mí a un poco a llamar la atención por contar de esa manera peculiar que estábamos haciendo, que es un poco, no son noticias en sí, sino un poco desmesuramos todo un acontecimiento y narramos digamos, de manera literaria y tal, lo que acontece. Luego, pasados 4 años, empecé bueno, durante todo ese tiempo, logré colocar piezas en medios internacionales, sobre todo porque me llamaba la atención que la visión siempre sobre los cubanos, sobre todo, y sobre la comunidad afro-latina, en estos grandes consorcios mediáticos, estaba totalmente sesgada, y era una visión que cuando era tratada y cuando es tratada, ahora un poco menos, era tratada desde una visión, digamos, despegada de esa realidad. Entonces me interesó un poco desde el propio terreno narrar lo que ocurría en Cuba, si bien Cuba es una cosa que para los cubanos es difícil de entender, imagínense cuando es contada desde fuera o desde una perspectiva de alguien que no la vive. Entonces todo el tiempo intento como mostrar ese país que no es el fetiche que la gente piensa que no es solo tabaco, ron y playa, y contar digamos, lo que es interesante para ese público que quiere conocer desde adentro esa realidad.
Y gracias, Abraham. And it's really fascinating how Abraham is telling us about how he began narrating play with dolls, right? It was sort of fulfilling his passion in sports. And I found it very fascinating because I too am a failed athlete. I remember playing baseball in college and thinking that I had professional aspirations, right? Well, an injury ended all that. And I love hearing how he described that his failure as an athlete actually drove him into journalism and drove him into narrative journalism because he started looking at politics and looking at culture in Cuba. And it was tough in Cuba because of the limits of what the population has historically been able to see and hear in media. And that drove him to look more at the international view of Afro-Latinos. and deciding that this is where he needed to be as a journalist, pursuing narrative opportunities. I remember that my own journey went from the baseball field to the announcer's booth, and then into narrative journalism as well. So it's a very familiar path, and I think it's exciting to see this kind of drive that we have in the community and among our panelists. And you know, Natasha, one of the interesting things that I think, and will take us into this broader conversation, you know, this summer has been a summer of reckoning here in the United States. Here in the US, we've been looking at race relations. We've been looking at ourselves, our own community. And I'm wondering, in this reckoning, in this grand debate and discussion, what kind of conversation has it sparked among Afro-Latinos? Are we talking more about bringing more voices up? How do we accomplish that? I think of it because I'm really proud to say that PBS, where I work as the public editor, we've managed to bring an Afro-Latino travel show to air that's going to debut, that has debuted on a number of local stations around the country. And I'm really hoping that this show catches on and really shows and exposes the Pan-American existence of Afro-Latinos. So I'm looking forward to that. Natasha, help us out with that same question. What are we talking about today in the community?
Oh, that's a great question. So I guess I'll infuse a little bit of personal narrative as well in terms of what motivates me. I remember growing up and seeing, you know, a lot of Spanish language media being at my grandmother's house or my aunt's house. My background is I'm Puerto Rican and African American. So I actually sit at a very interesting intersection being here in the continental US in my understanding of Blackness. And often when you think of the image of the Latina reporter, she's blonde or brunette, very light skinned or olive. And so there was this sense that, you know, an Afro-Latina wasn't the face of Latinidad, right? If you want to use that term, and that we were sort of other, but we were not the target demographic. And so I actually didn't become a journalist until I graduated from college 5 years after. I was a teacher, I worked at an investment firm, but every time I came back to this idea of representation and image, and who gets to tell the stories. And so when I did become a journalist, it was important to me to tell stories that raise the visibility of Afro-Latinos, so that when someone sees like Corallys Ortiz, they're not like confused, like, well, how is her last name Ortiz and she's brown, right? Because there is a diaspora. But living in the continental US, I think that people often just think of Blackness as African-American and a monolith. And because of a reluctance to talk about race and racism in the Latino community, we don't actually talk as much about the diversity. We say we love the diversity, but when it comes to actual representation on television and in commercials and in the business world, we're not seeing that. And so the journalist, I feel my responsibility as a journalist is to put the spotlight on the things that are uncomfortable, and also to amplify the voices of people who are already doing the work. So, you know, who are the activists? Who are the anti-racist people on the ground? And for me, Puerto Rico is my focus because that's where my family comes from, and it's a personal passion and love, but this is something that's playing out across the world and across Latin America. So to your question of what people are talking about, I work at theGrio, I'm vice president of digital content there, and obviously we're covering racism in the US every day. And when George Floyd died, you know, there were memorials that happened in Puerto Rico, in Loíza, right? One of the areas that has a really high population of Afro-Puerto Ricans. It's not the only area, but is one of the areas. And so there is a sense of connectedness to the struggle. You know, I think that Afro-Latinos have been fighting different struggles in different places, in Colombia, right? In Mexico, in Chile, where people are confronting racism in different ways. And so there's a sense of like, again, a global community that because of the internet, we get to exchange stories and kind of talk about our different experiences, but our parallel experiences. I guess the last thing I'll say before I kind of turn it over to the group is that there was a little controversy because after George Floyd was killed, we saw Latinos for Black Lives, this like saying go up, and there were people who were like, it kind of implies that there aren't Black Latinos too, So I think what has happened is that because of this conversation about race, the Latino community is looking within, and we're asking, how does the racism play out systemically in our various communities and on a personal level as well, right? So yeah, I think that those are just some initial thoughts about how this moment is really forcing people to think about our collective struggle, but also just the uniqueness of it.
Yo acabo de compartir, voy a hablar en español ahora, acabo de compartir esta conversación en mi página de Facebook personal, en la de fanáticos, ¿no? En la de seguidores. Y quiero hablar en español porque tengo muchos seguidores, casi todos mis seguidores hablan español, ¿no? Y esto es muy importante decirlo. En Latinoamérica, la cuestión del racismo como que es algo que la gente lo trata, pero como que nada, tú sabes, como que no existe, o sea, chévere. Y usa muchas palabras y términos que hoy día resultarían ofensivos acá. Luego de la muerte de George Floyd pasaron muchas cosas con los afros, ¿no? Y me choca muchísimo cuando voy a países, por ejemplo, estuve en Perú el año pasado, y la mayoría de los billboards de comerciales, de las promociones, eran de modelos que no representaban a la persona, a la mayor población de ese país. Eso pasa también con las novelas. Yo he cuestionado a muchos productores de novelas y directores que por qué no intentan hacer una novela en la que los protagonistas sean negros. A los negros usualmente en las novelas lo ponen o de barrendero o de trabajos, no le dan papeles protagónicos, ¿no? Y usualmente la gente que protagoniza las novelas en español no son originales 100% de ese país. O tienen descendencia europea en muchos casos, ¿no? Y eso causa un efecto psicológico en los niños muy grande, porque ven ese personaje de tez blanca, ojos verdes, y piensan que es el modelo a seguir. Entonces usan el término aspiracional. ¿Aspiracional de qué? Si yo como negro nunca voy a ser como él. Y ese es un tema que me preocupa muchísimo a mí, y creo que las cosas han cambiado. Yo felicito a Univisión, porque Univisión tiene ahí la Calderón, que es afrolatina, me tiene a mí también, hay muchos afros en posiciones técnicas, pero la televisión latina en Estados Unidos, o hispana más bien, tiene un gran reto, y tiene que poner las manos en la masa y trabajar y dar el ejemplo, porque muchos jóvenes afros latinos no estudian esta profesión porque ¿para qué la van a estudiar si no ven representación?
Sí, no ven una entrada para ellos mismos,
Dice,
¿no?
¿para qué voy a perder mi tiempo en la universidad estudiando esto si no voy a tener la oportunidad?
Sí.
Y
know,
eso debe cambiar. That has to change.
It does have to change, and I think you're spot on when you're talking about being in Latin America and looking at media, looking at television and seeing very few Afro-Latino faces. And often when they are there, they're not usually not even people from the same country. And you know, your description of Peru and going and seeing, watching television there and seeing that the media, the visuals of the media, the presenters, the reporters don't represent a majority of the audience, a majority of the population of the country. And you also point out this very interesting point about
let me tell you
aspiration. I think that's very important.
In Latin America, be white and be nice is a profession.
Yeah.
You have 80% of your future guaranteed.
Yeah. I think it's a very critical question, and it's opened up this debate within the community throughout Latin America. Natasha, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the same. You know, tell us a little bit about how we get from where we've been to what should be a new representative situation in media.
Right. Well, my initial thought is that there are three categories I like to focus on. One is history, right? Because Tony touched on this a little bit. In some places, the only way they talk about African or Black history in Latin America is through slavery. And it's this feeling of struggle and, you know, and that is it. And people don't know enough about their history or their heroes. And so I think we have to promote the history that has been ignored in the textbooks. Visibility is the other piece, right? So having Tony, you know, on Primer Impacto is like huge. That's a big deal because he's visible. Ilia Calderon, visibility and seeing that we are here. You cannot erase us. You know, that is important. And I think celebrating the work that people are doing. It's not always within the context of racism and struggle, but we are doing great things. There's Jarrell Jerome winning that Emmy for the Netflix series. He's representing Dominicans as well, right? And so that's Afro-Latinos, you know, at large. That celebration is important. But yes, I think that all of those are different areas we can focus on. And Corallys knows because it's funny, I actually wrote an article about some racism that Corallys experienced working in TV. I was at theGrio and I saw it and I said, we have to write about this because I want people to see this intersection of, you know, Latinidad and Blackness and race and how it manifests. So Corallys, do you want to share your experience as well?
Absolutely, and I agree. Just informing people and talking about the history, just bringing it up, using your platform, and that's something I definitely have done quite a bit here. And just to kind of go off, so my experience here, of course, being Afro-Latina, it's kind of double duty. You're representing the Black community and you're representing the Hispanic community. One of the things I asked when I first came here was, how is the demographics? So Jackson, Tennessee is roughly 50% white and Black with a very small portion of Hispanic community, which are primarily tend to be with a Mexican descent. So when it comes to being a news, of course, there's a standard of kind of almost being cookie cutter. You're always expected to have a professional look. And by professional look, I mean more Eurocentric, which has been like that for a very, very long time. So my transition into wearing my hair natural has been a personal journey as well. Getting used to just embracing my natural hair. In the Dominican Republic, you know, we're used to having our hair, you know, blowed out and everything. So over the years, I've been trying to break off from that, being comfortable from any type of hairstyle. I had an experience, unfortunately, I want to say one of my first racist experiences here, where I had a viewer call in multiple times, just kind of not saying that she did not like my hair. It was not normal looking. It got to a point to where she had left a voicemail that I happened to record because she had left other ones prior, essentially saying that she did not like my hair, that it looked too, I'm gonna kind of mute this word, ennery looking. You can kind of understand the context. And that was very, very surprising. Even growing up where I did, I felt like I didn't experience something to that level. So I kind of used my platform, my social media, to kind of explain why this was wrong. Of course, it is wrong, but for some people, it's they just don't understand how big of a deal it is for somebody to wear their natural hair on air. So and like you mentioned, I kind of talked a little bit about my background, the history about how big of a deal it is for women of color to be wearing their natural hair. And when you did write that story about it, of course, it kind of spread. And I used that as a way to kind of turn a negative experience into a positive one. I've had people in the community just approach to me saying that they appreciate me kind of bringing that to light, because they say that now that their daughters are feeling more comfortable to wear their hair more natural. And people, of course, they know my background, my Hispanic background, and they get really excited about that because I've gotten approached asking me where I'm from, and I just like to explain to them a little bit because not everybody knows where Dominican Republic is or what that is. So essentially using your platform to teach people about that. It's the best we can do. I even implemented last year for National Hispanic Heritage Month. I did a little segment for throughout the month of doing Hispanic heritage history and kind of highlighting members in the community in the, here in Jackson, even though we have a small Hispanic community. So essentially just using your platform to inform people is the best way we can bring it to light, essentially.
You have a beautiful hair. You have a beautiful hair. It's amazing how is most of the Latinos country, thank God that's changing. They call our hair like a pelo malo. O sea, you have to ponerte de rizado y el pelo
frase, ¿no?
lacio es el pelo malo. Come on. You have a beautiful hair. It's amazing.
Desde 10 años y después pasado 2 años dejé de poner, usar hair y ya.
Abraham, para que sepas bien de lo que estamos hablando de racismo y cómo se va manifestando en pantalla, ¿no? Como esas imágenes preferidos que se dicen en pantalla. Y Corallys nos estaba hablando un poco de su historia en una ocasión donde su uso de su cabello, que es bella y natural, ¿no? Como que provocó una conversación muy interesante y con una controversia también en su televisor, porque habían quejas de la audiencia y malentendimientos, ¿no? Pero para ella lo usa como una herramienta para abrir una nueva conversación en lo que quiere decir ser afrolatina en los medios. ¿Cómo lo ves de donde vienes tú y tu experiencia en tu país también natural?
Sí, yo creo que es importante visibilizar las historias de vida y sobre todo ponerle nombre, testimonios, porque eso obviamente logra más sensibilidad en las audiencias, en los públicos. Es evidente, es innegable el racismo que hay en toda nuestra región, obviamente en Estados Unidos. Hay como un falso entendimiento de que el racismo es una cuestión solo que acontece en Estados Unidos, y es un error craso. En todos nuestros países están plagados de testimonios, historias y de un racismo totalmente estructural. En el caso de mi país es particularmente igual, sucede igual. Cuba es un país que después de 134 años de que se abolió la esclavitud, es un país donde solo el 12.2%, fíjense que cifra más baja, de los estudiantes que van a la universidad son negros. El 12.2% solo por ciento. Y el 11% de los ciudadanos cubanos, solo el 11% tiene cuenta bancaria. Y solo el 3% de toda la población cubana es negra, puede viajar. Es decir, al final lo que sucedió acá fue que una vez triunfó la revolución de Fidel Castro en 1959 y sus políticas de igualdad y tal, en los primeros años de su gobierno se dio por superado el racismo, un mal que venía desde tiempos anteriores a este gobierno. Y como sucede en todos los regímenes autoritarios, se volvió el tema un tabú y se enquistó en la sociedad. Y por eso hoy, 61 años después de llegar al poder este gobierno, no se ha podido superar el racismo, e incluso hasta en un momento se volvió un tabú, no se podía mencionar el tema. Pero es innegable como acontece a diario. Yo recuerdo cuando estaba en la universidad, una escena que me impactó muchísimo fue en segundo año, llevaron a mi curso de periodismo al Instituto de Radio y Televisión. Yo recuerdo que un poco me escabullí porque quería ver, era mi primera interacción con las cámaras, con los periodistas que veía a diario en la televisión, y me despegó un poco del grupo, y en ese escape mío me topo con la subdirectora, un cargo importante del instituto, y me dice, estamos buscando negros porque no hay negros en la televisión. Y luego, meses después, Raúl Castro lo reconoce en un discurso que dice que el presidente del país, estamos hablando de 2006, 2007, reconoce y dice, ya hay negros en la televisión, no ha sido fácil ponerlos ahí. Entonces, si el presidente de un país reconoce que para poner negros en la televisión ha costado trabajo y los negros que están prácticamente ha sido por voluntad para un poco balancear, digamos, esa visión enquistada de igualdad, estamos hablando de un país que es totalmente racista. Y un poco también yo creo que en ese sentido, Post Opinion, para el medio por el cual trabajo, de la versión en español del Washington Post, está haciendo un trabajo genial, porque un poco hacer un paneo de todo lo que está sucediendo en América Latina, cómo estos procesos antirraciales se están ejecutando y cómo el activismo está sacando la luz a raíz de la muerte de George Floyd, todo el activismo en estos países, yo creo que es fundamental, porque yo creo que si bien Estados Unidos siempre va a ser el centro mediático del mundo, porque allí acontecen y están los principales consorcios mediáticos, yo creo que reflejar toda esa realidad que acontece en Latinoamérica y llevarlas a Estados Unidos, donde hay comunidades enormes de todas estas comunidades, es fundamental para visibilizar y sensibilizar a las audiencias.
Oh, that's great. Gracias, Abraham. I think everybody got the gist of that, right? It was just fascinating to hear this discussion and see how widespread it is throughout the region. Natasha, I think it touches on some of the things you wanted to bring up today. So as we start winding down this conversation, let's look at some of these other important points that you wanted to bring up. It's an incredible subject. And I think it's going to open up some doors for us and open up some new windows as we look at ourselves as a community. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was so enthralled listening to Abraham and Ricardo. I agree 100%. And I think that we have such power as journalists to rewrite the story. If we don't like the story being told, we can write the stories that matter. And so I guess the question for my fellow panelists is, what stories should we be focusing on when it comes to representing for our community? And I'm gonna start by talking about one story I did. I wrote about the census in Puerto Rico and the fact that there is an activist group of Afro-Puerto Rican women who are trying to get more Afro-Latinos to write negro, black, afrodescendiente on the census. Because if you don't count the community, then you cannot provide resources and design policy that addresses problems or disparities in the community. So for example, when we talk about race in Latin America, or particularly in Puerto Rico, there was one study that showed that there was actually health disparities between darker skinned Puerto Ricans and lighter skinned Puerto Ricans, right? But if all we talk about is unity and we're one family, then we actually aren't able to uncover how does that disparity play out? Why are darker skinned Puerto Ricans having poorer health outcomes? Is it related to the neighborhoods, the environment? What is that racial difference? Why is it playing out? So starting with the census and seeing yourself as part of a community, they are educating, they are putting on workshops, they are doing social media campaigns to get people to select negro on the census. So I wrote about that for the New York Times and a couple of other places because I wanted to raise their voices and their efforts. Are there other issues that maybe we should be writing about? Again, it could be connected to race or just in general that are impacting the Afro-Latino communities, right? Because we all have different experiences, but what do you think are some issues we should cover in the news?
Well, in my case, I do entertainment. I interview artists, entrevisto artistas, no? I remember that I did a report about Chokip Town. I don't know if you heard about that group. It's a Colombian group. They from Chiquibdó. By the way, Ilia Calderon is from the city. It's a really poor area in Colombia. It's in the Pacific. I think that es más pobre que Haití. I've been in Haiti like twice. It's really bad, the situation over there. And I like to focus, you know, the Afro-Latinos group to give you that platform that I have in Primer Impacto. It's a show with great ratings. So I think that putting my granito de arena in that part. So there is a lot of group Afro-Latinos in Latin America, and go deep in their culture thing, you know, what they do, go to their neighborhood and present the world, you know, that there is an issue related to our skin color in Latin America. So that's my angle of the story that I try to focus. Maybe in the last 3 years, I've been working on that.
Corallys, I know you cover weather, but is there anything that you would like to see, maybe from a national perspective, or even if other people cover it?
That's what I was trying to think. I was trying to think, because I do weather a lot. That's a whole nother aspect to where I'm also trying to be a representative in STEM, minority in STEM, Afro-Latina in STEM. I honestly think we just need to see the Hispanic community just kind of rally behind also just the Black American community, because there's those Afro-Latinos, we're kind of the bridge a little bit between both. So there's sometimes, I know some people feel that I'm not Hispanic enough and I'm not Black enough to kind of fit in either group. I just think we just should rally just together, really, to kind of show support for that. You know, again, colorism is still a big issue in the Hispanic community, and it's just something that's gonna be a very slow process to try to break and just keep, I wanna say the industry should keep, of course, considering more people of color to be more representative of just the overall community, not only locally, but of course on the national level. So I think that's like the best we can do. Again, I have a background in both journalism and meteorology, so kind of try to balance a little bit of both and being as representative as possibly as I can.
I'm glad you mentioned that part about the African-American community, because when you look at election coverage, for example, they often talk about the Black vote and the Latino vote as if they're completely different. And so Afro-Latinos have this unique space of, being able to, like you said, represent and talk about those interactions. So, yeah, it's okay. I got a phone call too, no worries.
Ahora nos están llamando.
Yeah. When we talk about going to the polls and, conversations about Donald Trump and all of that, and his attacks on Latinos and the things that he has said, we are not, there is an intersection. There's a conversation about how those communities are actually linked in more ways than sometimes people.
No, it is fascinating. You bring up a really important point there. I believe it's an abject failure. And this is surprising. This is 2020. And we are still looking at a legacy media, a mainstream media that doesn't understand that this community is multicultural, is multilingual, and is not just one block of Latino voters, right? And so it amazes me that in 2020, we're still having this discussion. But, it takes me to wrapping this up a little bit with Abraham, si nos podrías decir un poquito de tu punto de vista, ¿qué es lo que nos falta en cobertura sobre pues, la comunidad afro-latina? Por ejemplo, de mi punto de vista, he visto que últimamente, digamos, en Colombia, surge una población de periodistas afro-latinos que hoy en día están tomando los rehenes, ¿no? Y dicen que vamos a crear nuestro propio espacio en vez de esperar para un permiso de alguien, ¿no? Y mi pregunta es si has visto ese movimiento o si hay otra cosa que debemos de enfocarnos como medios masivos, ¿no? Medios aquí en los Estados Unidos y en otros países en América Latina. ¿Cómo lo ves? Para llevarnos ya a la cierre de esta conversación.
Sí, yo creo que el racismo, como bien decía hace un rato, es un flagelo que lleva siglos aconteciendo en el mundo. Pero yo creo que a nivel mediático está solamente, digamos, tocados o desmenuzados en situaciones particulares en los Estados Unidos. Es decir, yo creo que los medios no pueden esperar a que asesinen a George Floyd o a todos los negros y los afroamericanos que han fallecido en los Estados Unidos para hablar de racismo. Yo creo que los medios tienen que intentar montarse, intentar imponer una agenda mediática que pueda abarcar todo el tema, y que no solo es la muerte de los afroamericanos en Estados Unidos. Yo creo que hay razones y que están las historias de vida y los testimonios que hablan de un racismo estructural, no solo en Estados Unidos, sino a lo largo de toda Latinoamérica. Y yo creo que entonces los medios tienen que encargarse de encontrar esas aberturas y contar, no solo cuando haya, digamos, una catástrofe, como es el caso de George Floyd y el resto, y no solo contar esas noticias en el momento puntual de las manifestaciones, en el momento puntual de una muerte o lo que sea. Yo creo que el racismo es como decía, un flagelo que está todo el tiempo en la vida de los latinos, de los negros, en su vida diaria y cotidiana, y yo creo que narrar esas vidas todos los días, incluso aún cuando no haya desgracia, va a ayudar a que, digamos, los blancos o los no negros entiendan cómo los afrodescendientes están en desventaja social con respecto a ellos.
Bueno, gracias, Abraham. And it's a great point to end on, this opening now that we have. Let's take this conflict that's afflicted the entire nation and the entire region and use it to really bring some new understanding and bring new faces and new voices to the table and to the screens of our major media. And with that, we're going to close out this fantastic conversation.
I would like to say something, please. If you don't mind.
Pero ya pronto, ¿no? Para terminar.
Sí, no, quiero decirle que I would like to say that in Spanish. Yo llevo ya en la industria más de 30 años. Yo he pasado muchas, pero es bonito que esto se esté tocando en plataformas como esta, que se hable del tema. Así que los felicito, y esto se debe seguir haciendo, se debe repetir, porque la brecha se va abriendo.
Sí, y lo vamos a hacer. Y lo vamos a hacer. We're going to continue to have Palabra Presents and amplified voices throughout Hispanic Heritage Month, but I want to make it a year. Eventually, let's just take over the year, right? I think this is a great way to end this conversation. I want to thank everybody for participating. Look for us on our YouTube channel. Look for us on Palabra. We're going to have more conversations stand by, as we're going to be talking with artists, writers, civic leaders.
Great.
Bueno, pues por el momento ya terminamos. Gracias a todos. Thank you very much.
Bye.
And let's do it again.